For the construction video, I'm using photos of the finished system. If you are building it, remember that nothing is yet attached to either the baseboard or this vertical board. You will need to unstrap and restrap the vertical board to the telescope several times during these steps. Use a bungee cord during construction, but use a ratcheting tie down when using the finished system because bungees are too flexible. First, set up the telescope bolted to the tripod. Put the baseboard on the cart and move it so that the forks surround the telescope base and the bottom of the fork is against the base. Draw two parallel lines for the hinges that are 2.5 inches from the edges of the board. Use a combo square to do that. So there will be a line here in this general area on both sides. Strap the board that is to be hinged against the telescope with the bungee cord so the telescope and board are approximately vertical. So you have to loosen the deck clamp for that, and also loosen the RA clamp so that you can turn it so the forks are exactly across the baseboard as shown here. Position the hinges flat on the board with the holes at the ends of the hinge on that parallel line. Move it so that the swivel of the hinge is directly under the board. Do that on each side, of course. Keep the tips aligned on those lines. Put something under the vertical board to raise it slightly, like a stack of washers or a very thin piece of wood, so that it's not quite in contact with the hinges. Once you have everything aligned properly and careful to keep the telescope and the board both vertical, go ahead and bolt this end of each hinge down with 2 bolts through the holes. Don't tighten them up totally tight, just leave them slightly loose on both sides. Then fold the other half of each hinge against the back of the vertical board. That's the side away from the telescope. Then bolt it to the board with 2 1/4-inch bolts. That's what we used here, 2 1/4-inch bolts. Get the hinges bolted on both ends. As I said, leave them slightly loose because what you need to do now is unstrap it, fold the board up and down, make sure the hinges are aligned properly. They'll kind of self-align if they have freedom to move as you fold it down and up. Once you're sure the hinges are aligned right, go ahead and tighten all the bolts holding the hinges. Glue pieces of rubber on the board where the telescope touches at the bottom and at the top of the tube. Next, mount the brace under the hinged board. The brace has a couple of purposes. It prevents the bolt heads for the hinge and the brace from interfering with raising and lowering the hinged board. It provides space for the ratchets for the tie downs, which are between the 2 boards. And it provides room for the counterweights for the LX600 through the hole cut in the board. So depending on your system, you'll adjust the height of this board so that whatever is the worst case thing that projects between the 2 boards is not touching the lower board. So start with a 1-foot 2x4 mounted on edge going across and 31 inches from the hinge and 6 inches tall. And again, you might have to make it higher depending on exactly what you're using the system for. When you get it to the right height by trial and error, put a strip of rubber across the top to prevent vibration. The lower telescope braces that we'll mount next and the top lever braces that we'll mount later must be placed so that the PVC pipe through the mounting holes will straddle the metal handle on the lift cart when the lift table is lowered. And the mounting bolts and screws through those braces must not hit the levers. Now we're ready to mount these upper support blocks. And what they are is they're pieces of 2x4s. They're on their edge. Cut 2 pieces of 2x4. They need to be long enough to drill the hole for the lever, which is a 3/4 inch pipe, and then you're going to put wood screws through the bottom. So you're going to put those screws on each end so that they won't interfere with drilling the hole for the pipe levers later. When you're ready to mount these boards, make sure they're not touching the tube. You don't want this board to be scraping the tube. So you mount the two pieces, one on each side, so that they're lined up right with the deck axis. Now we're ready to mount the 10-inch braces, which are right here, and they support the telescope. When you move the hinged panel back, they actually lift the telescope, so they need to be strong. That's why they are 10-inch steel elbow braces, and they're mounted with bolts up here. This support here can be attached with screws because it doesn't support any weight other than just pushing it down against the brace. But start with the brace and lay a 1x2 crossways on it, and lay 2 pieces of that rubber material from the 2x2 foot pads. 2 because you want an extra space. You're going to put 1 on when you're done, and then push the elbow brace up against the bottom of the fork. Make sure there's some space between the brace and the telescope. Line it up here. A good starting point would be to draw parallel lines on this board that are 3 inches from the edge. Again, use a combo square to do that. So you'll have a line here that's going to be approximately where the edge of this brace will be. But the reason we're building it piece by piece is so we make sure everything really does work. So start with the brace on that line, slide it up and down to touch, but then make sure there's enough clearance between the brace and the telescope. So once you get this positioned on one side with the extra clearance of the extra piece of rubber, you can go ahead and mark where the bolts will go in these 2 holes on those braces. Do both sides, of course. So drill the holes, put the bolts through, mount the braces on both sides. Don't mount this board yet. Remember, you've already mounted this support here, holding this at a particular distance from the vertical board. Now you're going to cut this piece to sit on the brace and touch the telescope fork on the side. It's going to have a piece of rubber on the end. You're going to have to cut this corner off a little bit because there's a rounded corner on the brace, and if you don't, there'll be a gap right here. A little better view of the brace from the side. Rubber on this end, the brace touches the steel brace on this board, and it touches the forks. When you're moving the board to the telescope, you want the RA clamp to be loose so the telescope can rotate so that both forks will touch the 2 supports. Now once you've measured these to the right length and with the rubber so that they're both meeting the forks, go ahead and screw them onto the brace with wood screws through the 2 holes in the bottom, through the brace into the wood. Going back to this view, we're ready to mount this piece here. Cut a 5.5 inch piece of the 1x2. There will be rubber, remember, on the end of this board. So you're going to butt it against the rubber on the board, then you're going to screw it down to this. You probably want to have it not stick too far that way from the brace so that there's no danger of it touching the telescope when you're using the system. So once you've positioned it with plenty of clearance to the telescope base, go ahead and put the 2 wood screws in the bottom to hold this in position. Do that on both sides. Now you've finished these braces, this brace. You've got the hinges mounted. If you're building the system for an LX600 scope, the next thing to do is cut this rectangular hole in the middle of the board. And to do that, mount the counterweights on the LX600. This is the top of where your counterweights would go on your LX600, and this is the bottom of where they would go. So you're going to cut this slot out wide enough for the counterweights to go into them when the tube is pretty much against this board. The next step is to trim the hinged telescope support platform to its final length. We started with it a few inches extra long. This video shows the final assembled system. Remember, if you're constructing the system according to this article, you have not yet installed the casters under the platform, and you've not yet installed the tabletop frame on the lift table. So they're not there. You don't really need the telescope on the tripod for this step, and you don't need to fold up the hinged board. You can leave it down. But you do need the tripod, and you need the tripod legs extended as though you had the telescope on the tripod. And you have to have the cart approaching the tripod with one leg on the other side as though you were going to install or uninstall the telescope on the tripod. So arrange it this way. This is laying on the table. You've adjusted the cart so that the forks surround the tripod head with the center part of the forks in contact with the tripod. Adjust the position of the cart and adjust the position of the hinged platform until the end of the hinged platform extends 3/4 of an inch past the metal end of the lift table top. That's toward the front end of the cart. So it will extend 3/4 of an inch. Remember, this board's not here yet. But the reason you're extending it 3/4 of an inch is when you build the frame, there will be a 1x2 here, and the thickness of a 1x2 is 3/4 of an inch. So you want this end of the board to be above the front edge of that 1x2 that you will be installing. It's a little hard to see that on this picture because the cart is slightly turned. What you want to do once you've done that, measure the distance from this part of the cart to the tripod leg. You're going to adjust the length of this board so that there will be a 3-inch distance between here and here. Hopefully, if you started with this extra long, there'll be more than 3 inches at the top. Determine how much you need to cut off to make this 3 inches, and then cut this board off. To do that, remove the platform from the cart. Cut it with a jigsaw after clamping a guide board on the board. There will then be a 3-inch clearance from here to here. Remember, both sides. Make sure you have the cart evenly between the two legs. So you'll want 3 inches here. Once you've cut the base board to the right length, go ahead and cut the hinged board so that the end of it is above the end of the baseboard when it's folded down. Ready to attach the top supports here for the lever. Now remember, here on this end, when you lift the scope up from the board with these levers, the braces at the top here are going to be supporting the telescope. So you need bolts through these 2x4s. You don't want to try to attach them with screws because they'll strip out when you try to lift the scope from the board with those levers. So use a bolt all the way through. So that means you're going to have a piece of 2x4 that's long enough for the lever to go through it near one side and the bolt to go through it on the other side, so that that bolt will be doing the supporting. But there is a slight tendency for this thing to swivel. So you'll put a bolt on one end of the board and a heavy screw up from the bottom on the other end of the board. Be careful not to hit the lever. Mounting the levers, and kind of trial and error. Find a spot down here that's roughly in the middle of this piece for the lever to go, and drill a 3/4 inch hole into this 2x4, but leave like a 1/4 inch of wood on the end. So that way it's simpler. You just shove the lever into the hole till it stops, and you really don't need to attach it, because when you're lifting and lowering the telescope, you are not pulling up on this lever. Simpler to do if you leave it, just push them in, use them, pull them out again, because it makes the whole assembly shorter for putting it in your vehicle. You're going to drill the socket holes here down to leave a 1/4 inch wood, and you're going to use a spade bit here because the spade bit removes the wood as it goes. Up here you're going to drill all the way through, so use a hole saw. With a hole saw, what you do is you drill in it until the pilot bit in the hole saw comes out, and then you drill the rest of the way from the other side using sticking the bit in that hole that you've created. So that's a nice easy way to drill the hole through the top. So then insert the PVC pipes through the 2 holes. The levers are 3 feet long, and we'll cut them shorter later. For now, just insert the levers. Make sure they don't hit the metal lift table handles. If the lever holes are too small, enlarge them with a round wood file. Raise the board and bungee the raised board to the telescope on the tripod to verify the levers and lever braces don't hit the telescope. Adjust the position of the lever braces if necessary. Next, mount a short piece of 1x2 crosswise near the end of one fork and under the brace. After you raise the hinged board before approaching the telescope on the tripod, it will keep the hinged board tilted slightly forward, making it easier to move the fork around the telescope on the tripod. See the demo to clarify this.